Oh, again, what is it with this? Is my hair too poofy?
Mine's getting poofy too. I think I'm just about due for a cut.
I hated hats as a kid too. I hate them. My hair was not meant for it.
Nice. I like the rakish angle you had of that. Yeah.
Maybe I'll go with the kid. What's the Will Smith? Is that too soon? Is that too soon? No. Okay.
So Michael, I have to tell you, just kicking this off and just jumping right into it, because this will come out in May-ish or whatever, wherever we are on the schedule. I just want to tell the audience, like this, literally this past weekend was the Mission Chicago convention, Star Trek convention, and I didn't go, but I was on Twitter and I was paying attention to what everybody was posting, and clearly everybody had a good time. Hopefully people were safe. I didn't, not to sound like a prude, but I didn't see a lot of masks in the pictures. So I'm a little nervous that there's going to be a whole bunch of COVID reports coming out of it. But everybody was clearly having a good time. And boy, I tell you, we are in such a golden age for Star Trek right now. It is ridiculous just how much great stuff is out there. And I'm not, even talking about the game, but I'm talking about like so many series that are out there, so much cool product coming out by all the other licensees and licensors. There's games, there's new video games coming, there's new books coming, there's all kinds of cool stuff coming. And I am just like, I don't know about you, Michael, but I am just excited to be involved in one little piece of it. And like, I know Modiphius's Star Trek Adventures RPG is one very, very small piece of a very extremely large puzzle that is Star Trek. And I'm just so excited that we're reaching people all around the world. Eliza Pearl, the wonderful game master Eliza Pearl, you've seen her on a couple of different shows. And now, of course, now that I'm mentioning, I'm completely blanking. I think she was on Clear Skies, and she ran Blood of the Void, the Klingon campaign on Twitch. It might have been Twitch. Maybe it wasn't Twitch. Maybe it was something else. But anyway, she ran some events for us at the convention.
Nice.
Great response. Was super excited about showing people the game. We're going to try to do more conventions here pretty soon, but I'm just so excited that we're slowly getting the word out about this game into more venues and to more people. So I don't know.
Yeah, I was reading an article recently. The article was posted late last year, I think, but I wasn't aware. And they don't release detailed numbers, but on Paramount Plus, Discovery was the #1 streamed show.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it still holds it into 2021, but I'm like, wow, wait till they see Strange New Worlds, and then there's Prodigy. And so it's nice. I think all Star Trek fans, we sit on the edge of our seat when something new is released, because we're like, don't do something that makes people not like Star Trek, and so we're very sensitive and connected to it. Yeah. But the response and the new audience coming in, I was looking at the tweets and Facebook and social media on what was happening in Chicago too, and it was nice to see such a mix of fans. I've been to a Star Trek convention like 25 years ago, and actually longer. Wow, I'm old. Okay. I've been to a Star Trek convention about 35 years, maybe 30, wow. 35. I remember that was my first one. And it was definitely different, and now the look and people dressing up and picking their favorite character, there's so many more to choose from. Yeah. I think it's really nice. I think we are definitely in the golden age of Star Trek once again. Yeah. Cool. So very with cool. That, one of the things I know we like doing, for some of you who've just jumped in, this is Continuing Conversations, where we talk about everything Star Trek Adventures and Star Trek. I'm Michael Dismuke. I'm a freelance writer for Modiphius Star Trek Adventures line. Also one of the bloggers on Continuing Mission, which is the #1 fan site for Star Trek Adventures as of today so far. Jim, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure thing. Jim Johnson. I am the project manager and line editor for the Star Trek Adventures RPG, published by Modiphius Entertainment.
Yeah, I'm still vibing off of last week's show where we talked about mission briefs, and we had the bridges. We had Tony Pye, we had Al Spader. That was so fun. And so one of the things we're doing today is we wanted to get some fan love out there and get questions answered that have come up on social media. So we thought this is going to be a grab bag show, right, Jim?
Absolutely. Yeah, let's hit it.
Yep. Do you want to preface it first before we start talking about our opinions? Because this is going to be a lot of, us as RPG game masters. Right. We're going to be spitting a lot of game here,
Yeah. So we actually, Michael was gracious enough. He threw a question up on the Star Trek Adventures Facebook group. It's a unofficial group, but it's a great community of people playing the game, running the game, answering questions about the game. New fans are coming into it every week. We always welcome them with open arms. Of course, IDIC, one big happy family, one big happy fleet. Anyway, so Michael threw out the grab bag questions saying, look, what kind of stuff do you want us to talk about on this show? And we got some really interesting responses that really necessarily didn't really have a lot to do specifically about the game and the game mechanics itself, but it was more like, how do you get certain types of players involved? How do you get certain roles more actively involved? Like, my con officer's got nothing to do episode after episode. What do I do with them or her? How about, how are colonies different from star bases, different from starships? These kind of questions. And I want to preface this just by saying that we're heading into a field of conversation now where it's really just going to be me and Michael riffing off these questions, because none of this is official, none of it's canon. A lot of this is getting into the territory of make it up and make it work for your game. Like, if you ask these questions of 10 different game masters, you're going to get 10 different responses. And I just
we don't want you to testify against us in court if we're ever called to court on this. None of this we're saying is set in stone.
Right. And none of this, like most of what we're talking about, probably won't find itself into a book. It's not official content. You don't go to your game master and say, well, Michael and Jim said on this episode of the continuing conversations that it's this way, so it has to be this way. It's like, because this is a toolkit. So please just ignore what we're saying, right? Or dig for some of those little golden nuggets that I'm sure we'll stumble into here at some point. But
so I will admit, my players say I'm the best game master in the galaxy. So if you really want to use the stuff I'm saying, then you're more than welcome to.
So anyway, just disclaimer: this is just two GMs riffing on these questions. That's about as far as I'll go with it. So with that being said, let's jump into the first one here, Michael.
Okay, so this one's actually come up since the inception of the game, and I know we've talked about it in other podcasts, but I figured let's deep dive answer this one today. And it's about, I feel that I'm playing a counselor, but they don't really get used, or I'm playing a CMO, a chief medical officer, and they really don't get used that much. So I have never had that problem. And so I wanted to talk about what mechanisms I use in order to make sure that the counselor and CMO are engaged. So let's start talking with the CMO. We'll finish with the counselor. But for the chief medical officer, I remind everyone, if you're not sure how to use the chief medical officer every game, watch the original series, because that was the master class on having Kirk, Spock, and McCoy. I mean, when you picture it, you picture those three standing together all the time and having something to do. A chief medical officer in Star Trek is actually a key away team member. I mean, think about this. If I'm going on a camping trip, how often would you like somebody there to know first aid? And that's the way I treat the CMO in our game. It's like, we're going somewhere where we don't know the atmosphere, the animals, the flora, the fauna. We don't know if you're going to get shot, fall down a cliff. CMO, come along. So I've always had this issue. I'm like, I don't understand how you don't think the CMO is a crux character in a game. Jim, do you agree?
I agree. Yeah, I think especially the original. You brought up a great example of the original series, and I think what players really need to, or players and game masters, I guess, really need to think, especially players. Actually, let's talk about players here. If you're the chief medical officer, use Bones as your model, because how often was he on the bridge for no good reason other than he was on the bridge, right? Like because he was buddies with Kirk, and he loved to spar with Spock. And it's like, more often than not, he was on the bridge just because they needed to make sure that they gave things for DeForest Kelley to do, right? But come up with a reason, make it happen. Maybe one of your chief medical officer's values is, I got to be on the bridge, or things happen on the bridge, or like whatever. Maybe they have career aspirations to become the captain of a medical ship, right? Maybe they want to become a captain, and they take the opportunity to take command level courses and spend some time on the bridge or whatever. But McCoy, I think McCoy and
I mean, I can go on
Bashir are two great examples of doctors who do things, and they're not just sitting in sickbay all the time waiting for things to happen to them. They go out and they do stuff.
I was going straight to Bashir too, and even a little bit of Crusher too, because one of the greatest things you saw about Beverly Crusher, she was also skilled in infiltration. She was not just a medical officer. She had other things she knew how to do. They wrote her in also as a potential romantic interest to Picard. Going back to Bashir, he on a space station game, the CMO is everywhere, because think about all the illnesses that are going on at any time. And you talked about McCoy being on the bridge at all time. I think the reason why was, if you think about the role of a captain, they're in the highest stress position. They have a lot of lives on the line, a lot of people they're responsible for. Their mental sanity and their mental health and their stress level, who's watching that constantly when things are exploding? That chief medical officer actually has a responsibility, as one of the only people who could actually get that captain out of the chair.
That's right.
So you could play your chief medical officer as that person who's kind of just checking in. Hey, are you all right, Captain? Hey, take the pulse of the crew. How are they doing? Anything that happens could throw a Starfleet officer insane at any moment with all the crazy stuff they see. And the CMO is specially trained to help people maintain their sanity in these crazy situations, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's just the chief medical, like I'm sure we'll talk about like our characters as people, right? Because they're not just their job, right? They have other things that make them a rounded character. But as the chief medical officer, sure, you are in a unique position on the ship to be able to relieve that captain of command. And that's, I mean, not that you want to be on a power trip to do it, but like that is some of the awesome responsibility that is on your shoulders in that role, in that particular role. And that's just something to keep in mind, because that's something that a game master can totally use. And I've done it plenty of times where I put the captain into a really crappy position, and the chief medical officer player was like, "Oh, wait a minute, that's my job. Hold on, I got to do something now. I'm responsible for scanning the captain. It's like, oh, there's something not right here. He or she is being influenced by alien brainwaves or something, and you've been compromised. So you need to." And that gives the first officer an opportunity to step up, or another character to step up. So that's a piece of it. The other thing that the chief medical officer does, and this is instant built-in role-playing potential for everybody on the ship, because the chief medical officer is responsible for conducting
physical exams,
like making sure that the crew is in good health. And that is a perfect opportunity. That is one of the, I don't want to say it's cheap, but it's easy. That's one of the easiest opening teasers I tend to drop into a campaign from time. I try not to overuse it, but it's like, hey, chief medical officer, you open up the episode with you conducting a physical exam of player character who hasn't been doing a lot lately. There's your scene, go. And then you just immediately kick it off. You're in the sick bay, you're doing your medical evaluation, and you're riffing on some sort of conversation. I can drop in a subplot. Nurse X comes in with some sort of thing going on, and then the episode's off and running or whatever.
I love it.
But that's just a super easy way to get some connections with your character, with the other characters, and give you things to do that aren't necessarily like, okay, I'm the Band-Aid for the group and I'm just waiting for someone to get hurt.
Right. And game masters are God. So you can give someone a sprained ankle from their last holodeck incursion, or you could have somebody, if they take one or two stress on the bridge after getting hit by a photon torpedo, break their wrists, or twist their wrist and send them to the medical bay to talk about the situation. Once you've gotten there, hey, what's going on the bridge? Well, what's the captain doing about this? Ask a lot of open-ended questions as CMO, and you can be a pulse onto what people are feeling. Also, if you think about all the chemicals and all the radiations that you're dealing with constantly on a ship, the CMO has a lot of work to make sure everyone's doing physically well and not in danger, in addition to scanning alien life forms and finding out compatibility issues with those. So I just don't understand a CMO ever being bored. That's just
and also again, we still haven't even talked about them as characters, as people yet, right? With all the different things that they could have going on. Remember that chief medical officers especially are scientists. Right? They might be biologists, they might be chemists, they might have other skill sets. And chief medical officers are right there on the forefront of new medical anomalies and new medical discoveries. And especially, I think Bashir is probably the best example that I can think of off the top of my head. Crusher to a lesser extent, but Bashir especially, they made points in the course of DS9 to illustrate that he was working on experiments and studies and reports and papers, like kind of in the background over the course of seasons. And that translates directly into the scientific method and to extended tasks, right? Like there was a couple episodes where he was working on trying to find a cure to some horrible contagion. And it took it wasn't a quick and easy one episode and I'm done, right? It was long-term study that he was working on. And I think that's an opportunity for a chief medical officer to take on a really interesting extended task and, pick away at it over the course of a season or even a couple of seasons. If the game master is creative enough to come up with something cool and say, hey, here's this weird thing that's affecting this region of space, no one understands it. That's an opportunity for the chief medical officer to say, oh, this could be an important dissertation or something that I can get into.
If I was playing a DS9 game, I'd be having my doctor all over Ketracel White all day. Yeah. It's like, you better figure out how to figure out how we detect changelings and get me some replacement for Ketracel White so we can free these people from the Dominion. I mean, again, there's just so many ways with a CMO as scientists. Remember, they're in the sciences division book. Don't make them like our current medical doctors who only study one thing, podiatry. These are broad scientists who have chosen biology and the biological sciences to focus on. But in the Star Trek universe, there's so many things you need to know. How temporal anomalies will affect the human being, transporters. They're a wide breadth of knowledge for that. We can go out all day talking about how to use a CMO in games, for sure.
Yeah, and then my the second half of that answer, and this is going to be true. I mean, literally, if we do more of these episodes for all the other roles too, the second piece of this is going to be my stock answer. So maybe we'll say it once and never discuss it again. But then the other part of like how do you keep your character involved in the game is going to be true for all of them. That's lean into your values, lean into your focuses, lean into your talents, and lean into the character as a character. Like Crusher is a good example, right? Crusher had a lot of stuff going on. She also happened to have a son on the ship with her. That's instant subplot potential right there. There's all kinds of A stories, B stories that you can do that they did with Wesley and Crusher, and how that whole dynamic worked. I think they did the parent dynamic a little bit better with Cisco and Jake, but that might be my bias showing. I think Crusher and Wesley, they did what they could, but it got awkward when Crusher left in the second season, and then she came back, and then Wesley left, and it was just unfortunate. But your character has things to do that isn't necessarily involved with being the chief medical officer. So maybe give them some interesting focuses, give them some interesting values that have nothing to do with the medical profession, right? Maybe they've got some lingering backstory that they need to resolve, and that gives them an opportunity to do things that are outside of sick bay,
One of my favorite focuses I've talked about before is biomimetics, looking at the natural order of things in order to reverse engineer it for scientific purposes. The CMO, it could be looking at a technological issue and could be the one to roll the reason plus medicine to be like, oh, you know what? This is just like an Anduvian landworm from Zartan 3. And, that happens in nature all the time. We see that a lot in Discovery with the mycelial network. So again, come on social media and ask us for ideas if you're running out. Me and Jim will go all day on how to use CMOs.
Last thing, only because it's relevant.
Yeah.
It is also, and this is where session 1 comes into play. Like, we're going to make this the whole package here. It's not just, isolated things. This is the whole Star Trek Adventures package. Is lean into that session 0 and talk to your other players and work with them to come up with things that your medical officer can do with them. And here's a great example. The last campaign I ran last year, all three of the 4 player characters all had, like, independently, they started coming up with this. And then at session 0, they really honed in on it. 3 of the 4 player characters all had long-term recurring medical issues of one degree or another. And they were all connected to the non-player character chief medical officer. So that chief medical officer had interesting backstories with all 3 of them, but was also like their primary care provider in terms of, like, he was aware of their particular medical issues. And those were all ongoing subplots over the course of the campaign, where he was touching base with them on a regular basis, working with them with their particular medical issues. and that you can't just create that was the players taking upon themselves to come up with it at session 0. And then it got to the point where I was like, man, I wish I was playing this game, because I would be playing this doctor as my player character. This is because there's so much cool stuff going on with all the player characters. Plus I gave the doctor some cool stuff to do as an NPC, right? He has some cool focuses and talents and values. But so, don't, not say don't, rely on your fellow players to give you cool things to do too. Because if you're in it together, don't just think that you have to come up with all this stuff yourself. You work with them to come up with plot hooks and connection points and things that you can do with your doctor character. That's not just, you internally thinking, what am I going to do at this next session? I'm bored, whatever. Because if you're bored, then maybe you're not being creative enough.
Right.
So work with your game master and work with your players.
And if all else fails, put them on the USS Osler, Division 14 ship.
There you go.
You'll have medical issues to deal with all day long. Lower Decks reference there, Division 14.
Absolutely.
Right. I could go on about that, but yeah, definitely that would be fun. Now let's segue over to counselors. Okay. Again, ships counselors, we're going to, of course, go right to Deanna Troy. And need I say that her role, it developed. She matured a lot. I'll admit she was one of my least favorite characters when TNG started. Now she's I'm in love with the woman, because how they developed her character over decades. And the chief counselor is, as Picard really says, is the heart, the sounding board for him. Mm-hmm. Our counselor on our game is constantly checking in with people and has become, to me, if they really push it, becomes the invaluable narrator of the game in finding out what people are feeling. Because, it's like if you go to work, you could work, 2-3 months anywhere and not really express your feelings. But imagine if there was someone assigned to come up to you and say, hey, how are you managing the job? How's the stress of the job? You have any questions? And they just hit you with open-ended question after open-ended question. All of a sudden, I notice my players start getting into feelings that change the next scene completely. So we just introduced, we've always had a counselor on board since season 3 of our game, played by Aaron Paulier, who later became the chief science officer. That was an interesting switch of position. And then I was like, we got to have a counselor. And another person took up the counselor. And again, now I leave the characters in the room with the counselor and I say, go play. No dice rolls, and so much magic comes out of it. Do you have a counselor? Have you played a counselor at all?
We didn't have a counselor. Actually, no, the counselor was a NPC, I think. I have not had an opportunity to play counselor. And in fact, now that I think about it, I think most of my campaigns, it's ended up being an NPC. Gosh, I can't remember now. Mm-hmm. I think, again, the counselor, so like especially in the next gen era, right? The counselor and the first officer are the ones who are responsible for all the crew evaluations, right? So again, there's an instant opportunity for you to interact with literally everybody on the ship or on the station, because you have an opportunity to do role-playing scenes with so many people and just to ask those open-ended questions. How are they doing? Are they fit for a promotion? Are they fit for a change of duty? Do they need a break? Do they need some mandatory R&R? Is the stresses of the job getting to them? That kind of thing.
Two other areas for the counselor that I think about that, again, ours can be almost in every scene. When then an antagonist is there and maybe gets captured, the counselor doesn't have to be a betazoid. They're psychologists, they're psychiatrists. They know they know, body language. And so they go in and they start doing extended tasks on getting this person to reveal stuff. Mm-hmm. So they work in that capacity. And then again, a counselor is key on diplomatic missions. And so for our game, whether it's talking to players, interrogating people, or going on diplomatic missions, there's a lot to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, even mechanically, I think if I remember right, there's means now in terms of like talents for a particular character to take on more than one role, right? So you could be the first officer and the counselor, or you could be the chief medical officer and the counselor, or you can just kind of subsume the counselor duties into whatever other role you are. And I think Culber is a great example of this, where he's just the writers have been able to do more with him over the last couple of Discovery seasons, to where, he's a doctor. As far as we can tell, he's not really the chief medical officer. He's a doctor on the Discovery, but now he's taking on these counseling kind of duties where he's taking it upon himself to connect with people on a more professional, different, psychological level. And it's really meaningful. It's like really good, juicy drama, which is, part and parcel of Star Trek, right? But that's where you get the characters that come out and you get the interactions and development. And even Admiral Cornwall was a psychiatrist in her profession before she became an admiral. And like you see that when that whole interaction she had with Lorca was like pure counselor psychology stuff going on, where she was like there to evaluate him. And but anyway, so
a lot is how and players are left with a lot of leeway on what talents and what focuses and what values, as you said, they give their characters. So I know in our game, there's 2 focuses that I play off of. One, he has a focus of golf. And then the other focus is security encryption. So remember, Starfleet characters are well-rounded. He chose counseling and he was assigned to counseling on the ship, but he actually is really good at security encryption too. So he'll be on the bridge many times at the auxiliary thing, like, hey, let's decrypt this, or hey, let me run something on this. He has that additional set. The golf, I've noticed, he tends to try to use to say, hey, come to the holodeck, let's talk. And so he come play golf, but it actually is a cover for the fact that you're in a counseling session that you would not have accepted otherwise. So I really like it creates that our game, some TV shows have holodecks that they constantly go back into the 1940s, or they go at a beach resort. In ours, golf is becoming the recurring holodeck scene, which is kind of fun.
That's super cool,
for us. So again, both CMOs and counselors, so much you could do. It's really about how you make them a mainstay of your ship or station, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And shameless plug, because I can do it. The Science Division book and the Player's Guide provides a lot of options here too. They really do deeper dives into the Science Division in the science book, and then the Player's Guide. Al Spader did a great job adding more details to each of the roles that are out there. So I encourage you at least check those things out, just for more ideas, if nothing else. Like if me and Michael's riffing here isn't enough. I don't know, watching the show isn't enough. Go check out those resources and just get creative. Although I guess to a lesser extent, maybe watching some television shows that are based on the medical profession. Honestly, I haven't watched a lot of them, but there's tons of great medical dramas out there. That might give you some ideas too about what do doctors do when they're in their element, right? Or when they're fish out of water or whatever. But a lot of research.
I'll go back to mentioning what we've talked about before. If you're really writing a Star Trek episode, you have an A story and a B story. So maybe the A or B story doesn't fit the CMO. Well, that's fine. Make the alternate story all about the CMO. And so during a game, you could keep switching scenes and going back and forth. Again, the Game Master's Guide, like not plugging it, but it talks about how to cut scenes. And so people don't feel left out of a game. So that's a lot. We can keep going about CMO and counselors, but we have 2 other subjects we want to address.
Sure thing.
Okay. So this one was a comment where they wanted us to talk something about how ground-based frontier Federation colonies, that's super specific, are created and organized and how they could be used as a setting. Let's break that up into 2 parts. Okay. So ground-based frontier Federation colonies created and organized. What pops up in your mind right away, Jim?
This is a place where canon, like, we're not going to find an answer in the vast majority of Star Trek episodes, because like I don't want to say nobody cares, but like it's not important to the episode why that colony was founded, other than to say the Federation certainly has plenty of resources, but I am confident that the Federation is not going to plop a colony onto a planet for no good reason, right? Like now, granted, in the 60s, there was probably a colonization angle to where the Federation was expanding. They were out colonizing. We know that there are some current political issues with the whole colonization, element of things. But for the sake of this discussion, let's just say the Federation is not going to go find a planet and go, oh, let's drop a colony on there. There's got to be something on that planet that is an important resource or an important anomaly, or there's something going on that planet. Maybe it's its location. I mean, location is always important for real estate, right? But
there's got to be expansion.
there's got to be a reason, and this is a story reason. There's got to be a story reason that the Federation would bother to put a colony on that planet, and that in and of itself is just ripe for story, right?
Yeah.
Like, why is that colony there? There's got to be a reason, and work with your players to find out what that reason is.
Right. There could be one or two reasons. And I'm thinking, man, do we have a random table for this anywhere? I might need to roll that. Maybe create a random table, because it could be that one, it's along a well-trafficked space route. It could be strategically important to connecting to a subspace relay. In addition, it might also have a lot of dilithium in the mountains. And in addition, it could be agriculturally favorable. And so some farmers want to set up shop there and no one's claimed the planet yet. You could mix that, and now all of a sudden you're playing Sim City. What kind of systems do you need to support this city? Schools, and do you need army? Do you need a constable there? Do you need a couple spaceships patrolling the sector and transporting? And how often do ships come? And what alien species are nearby that also can make trade agreements and protection? And what threats are there? So you basically, what you're doing is doing Deep Space Nine, but on a rock. And so don't overcomplicate it when setting up a Federation colony. Just answer those few questions. And now I really need a roll table for this the more I talk about it, because you could say roll as many as you want, and then you can build out from there. I mean, if I had nothing else to do but play Star Trek Adventures, I think I might pick a colony with one ship that supports it, just so that you could live in a city. It'd be metaverse, right?
Yeah, so we kind of morphed into a little bit how do they get there, and then how can they be used as a setting. Before we jump into how it can be used as a setting, was there anything else you wanted to say about how that colony was created / organized? Do we want to dig into that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think what I would do is say it was the one that ended up being an agricultural mining subspace relay post. If I have that, then I need to know who's supporting each piece of it, because honestly, the subspace relay post might be supported by the Vulcan Science Academy. Maybe they are the ones who are doing some sort of research, and then the agricultural could just be a bunch of just citizens of the Federation, and maybe an alien species. And then finally, the dilithium mining, that's probably a Starfleet operation, perhaps. So now maybe that's where the characters are there, but then they have to create different characters to interact with those different segments of the population. So that's how I would also design up, from an operations point of view, how it operates, and who's walking the streets there, or if you're under a dome, who's under the dome,
Yep. And we see that on the original series, especially. There's always some sort of colony or space station out there. There's always an administrator. There's always some sort of bureaucratic personnel involved that can be foils for the player characters. But yeah. So I think that covers the whole created organized pretty well. Again, in my opinion, there's got to be a reason for that colony to be there. It could be 5 reasons, right? And you just come up with it. We'll work on a random roll table and find a book to put it in somewhere.
Yeah, and again, that's, like you said, that's bleeding into the setting, because at this point now, I just named 3 organizations, and now I'm going to, as a GM, create conflicts. So I'm going to create that the dilithium mine is creating an agricultural problem, maybe with a bunch of people who are like, don't mine here, environmental issues, get Starfleet out of here. This is a Puritan society or something like that. Or the Vulcans have enemies. So where the raw, so I take those 3 organizations and just create conflict.
Yeah. I mean, conflict is classic, and for settings, this is where you get to indulge in some world building, right? Like what's the local flora? What's the local fauna? What kind of strange spatial anomalies are going on in this sector of space, or in this star system? What's the indigenous life like? Are there sentient indigenous life on the planet? Are there not? Is there evidence of former sentient life? Are there like ancient ruins on the planet? What's the story there?
Dilithium mining may dig up something really interesting.
Yeah, exactly. How about some interesting life forms that the player characters could run into? What's the weather like near your colony? Is there some strange is there some strange weather stuff going on that they can't explain?
When the subspace relay goes out and the Vulcan science director says, "Hey, Starfleet, can you help out?" and all you have is a runabout to check it out.
Yeah, exactly. And that's an important piece of the setting too. That's something that DS9 had to deal with, is like, instead of going out to the adventure is coming to you. And so that's another story question, is like, okay, so you created this colony on this planet. Why would the adventure come to you? Like, what's so important about your planet or your colony that aliens are going to want to come and check it out? The Klingons are going to come check it out, the Romulans, I mean, whoever. There's got to be a story reason, because if there isn't, then your players are going to be bored because there's only going to be so much to do on the planet, right? This is Star Trek. It's big. It's a bigger story than just one little planet. It's got to have more going on. And what kind of that's a great question, Michael. What kind of ships do your players have at their disposal? Because like, if there's anything that's really important to Star Trek, it's the ships. Ships are just as much of a character as any of the people on the planet. So you got a bunch of runabouts, you have a bunch of shuttles, you have a little dinky Oberth class ship in orbit that goes out doing surveys that you got. That's your emergency ticket off the planet if something goes horribly wrong.
And I'm going to trick stuff, and I'm always going to do stuff like, wow, these Starfleet officers got dropped off and they have a runabout, but an old Oberth class ship fell into possession in one of the farmers, and they use it purely for scientific purposes. And so you have to negotiate with them to get that ship up in shape for something. Something happens, and no, don't use it for war. You guys are war. Yeah, I could just go all day.
Yeah, and then you got the great thing about colonies and stations and stuff is such a, again, DS9 is a great model where you have the ability to create a huge cast of supporting characters and recurring characters, right? You can lean right into the old classic westerns of you got Prospector Jones, who comes to the colony once a year to trade goods and then goes wandering off into the wilderness again, and you don't see them again for another year. But it's always fun when they come back because they got some sort of horrible thing that goes wrong.
How about the disgruntled know-it-all retired admiral?
Yeah.
Who retired in the farming community, but he still has a lot to say about how things should run around here.
And second guesses the commanding officer at every possible opportunity. Yeah,
right. Not even commissioned any longer. Yeah,
you got Harcourt Fenton Mudd, who shows up once a season to wreak havoc and then disappears again. So I mean,
don't forget the Klingons who come by because it's on their trade route, on their patrol route, so they hit the bar up and wreck town every so often.
Oh, so I mean, as a setting, it's great because, like, again, look at DS9. Instead of it being wagon train to the stars and you're in a ship going off and exploring, you've now established a frontier town somewhere, and you've got all those personalities and all those tropes and all those story possibilities to lean into.
Yeah. So I guess my answer is simply, if I would put it simply, is if I was to run a season of this, I'd have 3 organizations with conflicts. I would have each organization represented by 1 or 2 real big personalities. This is, you could think of this almost as city council. Make sure it's an odd number of people too, so that you lose and win votes every so often. And then I would send in, that season, 3 or 4 things that come from off planet, some problems that have to take them off planet, or people who drop by in a Love Boat style fashion, and yeah, I mean, easily it could make this a fascinating game. Yeah.
And just to add one last element, I know we could go at this all day, but a station, a colony kind of story is also well suited for players who don't want to play Starfleet. Right. So if you want to play any of those roles that are in the player's guide that are not Starfleet, so you could be an expert or a bureaucrat or a diplomat or a local spiritual figure, maybe.
Yeah, a Vulcan spiritual leader or some other species that went out there. Yeah, this game is just phenomenal. I mean, you put me anywhere on a mining colony with only 12 people and you can create stories all day. With this. So good. This actually bridges well into the next question our last question that we're going to tackle today from the grab bag. And it said, someone wanted to learn, like, what about if we talk about JAG or courtroom drama in Trek? They said, apparently Starfleet officers can just suddenly be asked to be lawyers. Yes, that is true in some cases. So looking at plot threads for those sorts of uniquely social extended challenges. So let's talk a little bit about JAG and legal issues in Trek. Are there any episodes that stand out in your mind, Jim, when you think about, you don't have to know the exact name of the episode, but do you remember the situations when it comes to legal issues?
Yeah, if I remember right, there was a couple in the original series. I think Court Martial is the first one that comes to mind, And then there was I can't remember the titles, but Samuel Cogley was a lawyer, and he got involved into it. And that might have been court martial. I don't remember. And then of course TN Next Generation had a couple as well, especially the one with Measure of a Man when Data was on trial. Basically, is he a thing, or is he a living sentient being? And Riker and Picard were both pressed into judging, you being part of the prosecution and the defense. There's other ones. Drumhead was another one.
I forget the name of the one, but the one where the officer was actually Romulan heritage, and so he was brought up to question his suspicion as
that was Drumhead.
Drumhead, yeah, that's a brilliant episode. I think
that was really good.
At that point, yeah. So, and there's been other times where they've been called in to intercede for other species too, in some sort of legal, diplomatic way throughout Star Trek. I think in my game, these have been some of our most pivotal games. It's easy for us because we have one of the only Romulan captains in Starfleet, and so accusations fly when anything goes wrong. There's many within Starfleet who thinks that he is playing the long game for the benefit of the Romulan Star Empire. And so he's subject to a lot of discrimination and bias and called in on hearings just to be questioned. We're just questioning, no, you're building a case. And this has become one of the most fascinating pieces of our game. The social, there's two ways we handle it. And I'll ask you, Jim, how you handle it. At first, we handled it as extended tasks. I have to say that it's not my favorite way to handle it, because as a game master, I play very narratively and logically. I don't need the dice to tell me if they're making a good argument or not. And so we graduated from extended tasks to really just holding a real court case where people bring their evidence. And the point is they have to be proven, guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. So I really lean in. I don't want the players to go to jail. We know that. We know we don't want to put them to a penal colony. So I really make them argue their points, and I come back with really hard evidence and points against them, and they argue, and they win every time, even if it's prolonged over several episodes, the case. But that's one of my favorite pieces, actually, of Star Trek Adventures is people acting like they're in the Navy and having to defend their actions, breaking the Prime Directive. Did you disobey orders? Did you sabotage on purpose so that you could do your own thing? Those kind of questions we pull into the game a lot.
Interesting. That's an interesting perspective. I have to admit that I think in 30 odd years of playing Star Trek, I don't think I've ever been a game master, involved in a courtroom drama kind of thing. And I would struggle to remember doing it as a player. I think there might have been, it wasn't a courtroom drama, but it was, similar, where we were involved in working with an alien species to do some legalese type stuff. But I think it's just never really come up in my games. And I don't know if it's because like that whole courtroom drama shtick just doesn't come to me, like as a player or as a game master, or just like those storylines just don't occur to me, I guess.
I will say that only one time, only one time have we actually had to go into court with three admirals and have that tense scene. And the captain at that time was a first officer, had representation. How we've dealt with the courtroom drama is the collecting of the evidence beforehand. So maybe it's a conversation. In this case, the first officer is representing a rival captain who's making accusations toward our current captain. And they're collecting evidence, sending psychologists in, the counselor to talk to this rival captain to be like, you're acting out of paranoia and bias. And it's creating all these in the quarters and in the ready room conversations as they're trying to both build their cases. And I don't know whether it'll actually end up in front of a Starfleet JAG or not, but everyone knows they're collecting evidence against everybody else. And interestingly, they're coming together in an interesting way through this, because I add a conflict that makes them come together. So they're not necessarily legal rivals, but the conflict they can both agree on.
Okay.
And will that affect later on someone dropping charges, or, just let it happen as it happens. Yeah. But that's how I treat courtroom drama in Trek. Is maybe you're right. It's more the science behind the collecting of evidence, be that psychiatry or scientific evidence.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. I did in the player's guide, was it in the game master's guide, we talk about forensics and how to handle a forensics investigation and also a legal proceeding as an extended task. Mm-hmm. So it is in there, but it's good to look at what the process is, because that process would act like beats in a mission brief.
Yeah.
And that's where you can go with that. So we got to get you into some sort of legal court case so you can see what it's like. True drama comes out
or not. I mean, and this is the great thing about Star Trek, right? Is it can be so many different things. Like I think I've always been more of the optimistic, looking outward kind of. What kind of things can we get into with aliens and new discoveries and new explorations, as opposed to the more inward focus, like, oh, you did this thing and now we're gonna cross-examine you to find out why you did that thing, and we think you did it wrong, and we've got our biases and we've got our prejudices and stuff, and certainly nothing wrong with it. That's certainly rich with drama potential, right? But I think that's just never really been what I've been. That's not where I go to find my drama, I guess.
Yeah. I like, because we're big on the B stories, is that, you're doing your job, but you still have a personal life or even career things going on. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, my players comment that while they're in the middle of an action scene, all they want to do is get back to solving their personal problem.
Yeah.
And I love that, because then that gives us, when things slow down, they immediately jump back into the narrative, which I really appreciate. Yeah.
Well, exploring personal problems, that's one thing, certainly. But I'm curious, Michael, so like doing all these legal, court cases, and you've got, players pitted against each other doing the arguments and the forensics and stuff, like how do you keep that from becoming an adversarial?
Okay. Good question.
Role playing, because some players are much more effective at thinking on their feet and creating, legal arguments and being persuasive and all that stuff. But some players, that's not what they are good at, right? And so when you put two players into that situation, how do you adjudicate that in such a way that one character's not being steamrolled?
Well, the good thing is one thing I appreciate about the game, I do keep it collaborative with the character. So the antagonists, the NPC, are the ones who are always on the rival position. Mm-hmm. And even in this case, where the first officer, because they're the only available legal representative, have to, they were asked by the other captain to be their legal representative. It's still tearing them up inside, because they're like, and that, it reminds me of the episode where Riker and Picard were in clashing positions.
Yeah.
That's the thing there. It's like, I still got to do my job. And I think that's many times in Starfleet where you have to follow an order, even though your gut says no. I think that's the conflict. And that happens every episode, whether or not they're in a legal battle or not, where I'm putting conflicting objectives and values together. So in that way it plays it, but I would not allow, I wouldn't design in my game where players are fighting against each other. In most games, it's always they have a common goal. Even if this case, it means her doing her job well as a first officer and legal representative, so that Starfleet true justice can happen. So
yeah.
It's really interesting. It's create, and they were the ones who came up with the idea of who would represent this rival captain. So I thought that was, they could have picked the NPC, which would have been fine. And so therefore that NPC would have been an antagonist, but they decided to use one of their main crew members, which to me, I love that they ramped up the drama like that.
Nice. Yeah, and this is probably a good place where your group composition probably plays a role into what kind of stories you're probably going to tell. Like if you have a group of player characters, or not player character, if you have a group of players who like that kind of storytelling and like that kind of back and forth legalese type of stuff, then sure, lean into it and give them more opportunities to do that. But maybe if you end up with, like for me, now that I'm thinking about it, now that I'm reflecting on all the past players I've had, I don't think I've ever had a group of players that were really interested in that kind of storytelling and that type of, again, not intentionally adversarial, but like really having to be persuasive, not verbalists, but like to be persuasive in a courtroom setting. It just wasn't their skill set or their specialties. And I wasn't in a position where I wanted to push them because, like, we're here to have fun, right? You don't want to be forced into doing something you don't want to do.
Well, as usual, this story, and this is good that we're discussing this story, what makes it an impetus for them to want to play it, it's actually a mask for a lot of the social issues we see happening in the world today, where because someone looks a certain way, assumptions come. So think about Romulan captain. I'm not ruining the story by telling it because I all know the story, is trying to prevent the destruction of Romulan supernova because they were told ahead of time that it's going to happen. And so people in the Federation are saying, see, he's serving the Romulan Empire. It's like, no, I'm saving lives. And so that story right there is really the crux of the story. And so the NPC is representing the bias of Starfleet not wanting to help Romulans because they see them only as Romulans, as not as what did Picard say? People, right? He says, I was here not saving Romulan people, I was saving people, right? Mm-hmm. And so they're hitched on that. They're viscerally attached to Picard as a show, and they have opinions about it. So I drop that in and I show, well, there's a Starfleet legal issue going on here, and how are your characters going to navigate that? Are you going to go rogue to save lives, or are you going to follow orders the entire way? And so that's really what I think is the impetus for the players, is they're going the Kirk route right now. they're really ready to take a ship out of space dock and do whatever the heck they want.
There you go.
Yeah. Cool. So wow. So today we talked about counselors and chief medical officers. We talked about Frontier Federation colonies, how to use them as a setting, and we blabbered on about JAG and courtroom drama in Trek. How do you think we did for our first grab bag show?
I don't know. I mean, I'm going to be the wrong judge of that. I think we're going to have to leave it to the group to tell us how if it was not enough detail or too much detail, or if we hit the softball into center field there. I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought it was good. I mean, it's always great to riff with you on these things, and you've given me a lot to think about as always. And I don't have a game to play right now, but because I'm so busy with all this Star Trek stuff. It's just really great to just go back and forth and just blow out some of these topics. I was surprised we got the three of them.
Yeah, it inspires me actually to, like, as we talk, I'm like, I'm gonna have to listen back to this and see if I need to write this into something, because some of it might hit the spot, and we would love if you as the fans and listeners tell us what works, and even throw us more ideas for future episodes.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, cool. Anything else you want to finish with, Jim, before we start doing our normal wrap up?
No, man, I think I'm good. I think this is a great information. Just again, just remember, this is just us riffing, and hope something here was useful and interesting. Would love to hear about it. Use the comments feature, or hit us up on Twitter, or especially the Facebook group, Continuing Mission, the official forums, the official Discord. We'd love to hear your thoughts on all this stuff, because every opinion is valid, and I certainly learned just by reading everybody's posts about all the kinds of things that they're doing in their games. I'm always inspired, and I always find new ideas to add into my grab bag. And one of these days I'll run some stuff, and people will be thrilled. But for now, it's just this is a great way to generate more ideas.
Yeah, I mean, we can see the universe is endless, as are our imaginations. There's always stuff to talk about with Star Trek Adventures. It takes us places we never thought we'd see, right? So let's go ahead and do our normal tradition of shout outs to the brick and mortar. We love the brick and mortar because you're keeping gaming alive at the tables, selling those dice, selling those books, the whole Star Trek Adventures line, plus some. So we want to, I have David Corby, who wants to give a shout out to Gamescape in San Francisco. What's up? I'm in the Bay Area, what's up? So that's good to hear, a San Francisco shout out. We also have Derek Mann, who shouts out the Game Depot in Tempe, Arizona. He said it's Arizona's longest running game store. Oh my goodness. They closed last week after 43 years, so the owner could retire. But it says Rick Loomis helped him start up back in the day. So Game Depot in Tempe or Arizona, we're going to have to find out where the game store to go is now down there. So if someone ever wants to shout that out, they can. And then last two ones, Century Box in Calgary, Alberta. That's from Brett Knorr. We love shouting them out. And Jeremy Gipton says Isle of Games in Tucson, Arizona. Not too far from Tempe. Actually, I think it's really far from Tempe. If you're several hours. But so Arizona got some love. And Gauntlet Games in Lincoln, Nebraska, Joe DeMarco says. So look at all those brick and mortars pumping out.
Fantastic.
For the masses. Who do you want to thank before on our way out?
Yeah, well, I mean, thanks to all those brick and mortars for being the front lines out there with the fans, and for building the hobby, like not just the game, not our game line, but just the hobby in general, providing a place that people can go and find stuff and find connections and all that great stuff. For this episode, I think I'm sure I don't say it enough, and I should probably say it every episode. But thanks to the fans, I think this past weekend was the Star Trek convention, and I was so I didn't go to the convention, but I was keeping an eye on the Twitter feed, and like it seemed like 99% of my Trek friends on Twitter were there, and I wasn't. I was a little jealous, but I was so inspired by all the pictures everybody posted of their cosplays and the costumes and the actors having fun, and it's so great to see the Trek family come together and do just really fun, cool stuff. And I know the Star Trek Adventures extended family is a component of that. But it just, especially with all the challenges that we're facing in the world right now, it's just nice to see that we have little pockets of joy that we're able to pull together and create. And I know that myself and the whole Star Trek Adventures team, we're doing everything we can to make this game as accessible for everybody. And hopefully we're just bringing a little bit of joy to somebody's world. I know I've gotten so much joy out of doing this game for the last 5.5, 6 years now. And I just hope people are finding joy in it as well.
Yeah, Paramount, keep it up. We're happy. We're happy to be able to do that. All right, then we're signing off from another amazing continuing conversation. IDIC.
Peace and long life. Live long and prosper. We'll talk to you next week.
All right.